All right, welcome to the roast. It's Joe and Kelly at Cabin Coffee, and we wanted to bring in one of our customers today. We have, in the River Prairie area here, we have a Veterans Memorial, and we brought a veteran with. First of all, it's awesome to get to know our customers, and the stories that they share, the fun that we have, it's probably the best part of our job, wouldn't you say, Joe?
I would. These are people that I would not have met normally, and just so happens that when you are in customer service, because we serve people, not just coffee, you get to know people on a more personal level. And I was fortunate enough to meet Stu 5 years ago, and he's a delightful, just a delightful human. He's loved by my baristas too, and just a really solid guy, and if you met Stu, you wouldn't know his background at all, until you get to know the guy and you hear some of the stories, and he's just very impressive, and what he's done in his life is just pretty amazing, and I think it's important for us to remember the people that have, served our country so that we can enjoy the freedoms of like a cabin coffee as a business owner that we are able to do. And it's just an honor to have Stu here.
Well, thanks for coming in, Stu, and we want to thank you for your service. Thank you for being a loyal customer of Cabin Coffee. And we'll get into it. I know Joe comes home all the time and shares stories with me, which is one of the reasons why I thought, let's let you share your stories with the world here. Joe, what's one of your favorite stories? Or
my favorite story is that I can tell you how I met Stu. So we were at the Veterans Memorial. They were doing like a fundraiser, or they were just doing it's for the veterans at the event center, River Prairie. And Stu walks up to me and says, "Are you former military?" And I said, "No, I'm former law enforcement." And we started talking, and he's like, "So what do you do?" I said, "I have a coffee shop." And he's like, "Well, where is it?" And we walk over to the window, and I point 100 yards away from the River Prairie Center. I said, "It's right there." Well, then he's like, "Oh, okay. So do you have Kenya coffee? Because I only drink Kenya light roast, and I order it online." And I said, "Yeah, I got Kenyan coffee, and I roast it on site, so it's fresher than what you're buying." And he kind of looked at me like, "Well, I've been drinking this for a long time." And I'm like, "Well, I think you should come over and give it a try." And, lo and behold, he walks in, I think probably a week later, and we start a conversation, and made him his Kenya light roast, and he's been coming back ever since, got him hooked. And in that time, it's been a really good relationship, and I enjoy seeing him. He's one of the customers that makes my days a little brighter when they're stressful.
All right, Stu, I have to ask, what's your side of the story? What did you think when you first met Joe?
I said, look at that big dude over there, and then we got talking coffee, and yeah, exactly like you said, I ordered that from a online company, and he said, "Well, we can roast it right there." And I said, "Really?" So I started, I think I got a pound, and now it's increased to 2 pounds every time I order. And it's very convenient because I can call up, and I can either text Joe and leave a message, and Gracie will make it, or I'll come in and order it. But it's been really a blessing to just, whenever I need coffee, I call up and say, "Well, when do you want to pick it up?" Maybe tomorrow, and there it is.
And if you look at my calendar, you will see throughout the week, Coffee with Stu. It's become one of my weekly events, and, some of those meetings you dread in the calendar, not one that I dread. I look forward to it and get to hang out with my friend and tell stories and drink some coffee and hang out and get Cabin Coffee. So all in all, this is one of the reasons why we've opened up Cabin Coffee, because remember, people, it is about the people and not about just serving coffee. So, we get to serve Stu and thank him for his service to our country.
Well, I want the audience to get to know you a little bit better, Stu. So you were in the military.
Correct.
In the Army.
Correct.
Okay. Tell us how you decided to go to the Army.
I have an older brother that was in the Air Force. I was going to UW Whitewater, majoring in nothing. My dad was sold Beechcraft aircraft in Rockford, Illinois, and I would work down there in the summers on the flight line and start taking some flying lessons. And I told Joe, a friend of mine, his last name was Boss, kept saying, Stu, I'm getting these notices from the Selective Service. And I said, well, if they're going to your house, I'm not worrying about it. That was my smart. But one day I was at the airport. I don't know if I'd taken my lesson for the day, but my dad said, well, maybe we should go down and see the recruiter and see about flight school or something. So I went down to the Army recruiter, and I was kind of naive. I didn't realize how bad they wanted helicopter pilots. So I do a little presentation at Crestview Academy for my grandkids, so I always tell them that, the test was they showed you a rock and an airplane, and they said, which one of these will fly? And I picked the airplane, so I got into flight school.
Nice.
So you weren't drafted, you volunteered, and you were a Huey helicopter pilot. And, I think in all the movies it portrays just the amount of stress that would take and what your responsibilities were. And you transported troops and you received a Purple Heart. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We inserted troops. We flew supplies. Sometimes we did medevac. All kinds of things, I was one of the older guys. I would think I turned 21 in boot camp, and the other guys are 19 and 20, but you get out of flight school. I went to Savannah, Georgia. Then I went to Vietnam, and I kind of a hot dog thinking you're bad, and then you get over there and you've got all the extra weight of crew chief and gunner and 2 M60s and all that stuff. So it's like learn all over again. Everything you thought you were really good at, you don't feel very confident in, And so we were way up north by the DMZ. Probably the first 30, 40 days I flew once. We were filling sandbags to put around our tent otherwise. And it's some of it's a people thing, like it's a little relevant. We've talked about people management and how you treat people, and it's the same thing. The first guy I flew with was terrible. He yelled and screamed, and I was scared to death, and then the next time I flew, maybe a month later, I had a different fella. And he said, well, Stu, this is how we do this and how you come into an LZ, a landing zone. And so the person makes all the difference in the world, and it just got better and better. And there was one little fella that was our company instructor pilot, and I was having difficulties coming over the tops of the trees into an LZ and running out of power in a sense. And he said, well, just do this and this, and that. Phew. That was it.
Wow. That sounds scary.
Yeah. And how old were you? You said 21 at the time?
Yes.
That's an unbelievable amount of responsibility for a 21-year-old. I remember when I was 21, Stu, and I wasn't in charge of anything like that. I was just trying to navigate college and show up on time for practice. So we've had very different experiences at our 21 years of age. So you received a Purple Heart for being wounded. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
We landed in an LZ or landing zone. It was a larger one. We shut down for a while waiting for this. We might have been flying, it was called Charlie Charlie or Command and Control. And so I took my fatigue shirt off. I had my OD green T-shirt, when I was behind the helicopter. I hadn't fired an M16 on automatic, so I was back there doing John Wayne. And And I went back up to the front of the helicopter, and I saw explosions coming my way. And so my training said, Stu, you should hit the ground. But I looked around and everybody else was running. So I said, well, that's what I'll do. So I took a step and one blew up in front of me, and it felt like I was in a sandstorm. I've told Joe, it's funny, I was what you call a gearhead. I had a Roadrunner, 4-speed. So I ran behind this pile of dirt with this guy, and my arm was all red, and I assumed it was, just a piece of skin holding it on, but I couldn't move my wrist. So the only thing I worried about was I looked at this guy and said, I can't shift my car. And then after that, I probably didn't fly. It hit my radial nerve, so I couldn't move my wrist too much. My friends called me the claw because I carried my coffee cup like this, And then, long story short, I went down to see a neurologist. He said, come back in a month. And so you're sitting around. And then they sent me down to the southern tip of Vietnam to be a tech supply officer that would order parts, skids, and all kinds of stuff for helicopter. I got back. Now it's maybe 6 weeks I haven't flown. And they said, we'll go back to the doctor. So I went back to the doctor. Well, he was ETS. He went back to the States, so there's a new doctor. And he said, hold your hand out, and pushed on it, and it was not bad. But he said, come back in a month. Well, so I went back to the company area and said, I'm free to fly. I'm not going to do this anymore. But I hadn't flown for so long, I had no confidence. And so David Strickland was the fellow's name that was our instructor pilot. And he said, hey, Stu, do you want to go fly tomorrow? And I said, sure. And so he said, I'm just going to do, we called it ash and trash, mail run and do some stuff. And he said, the aircraft commander sits in the left seat. So he said, Stu, you get in the left seat because I haven't flown right seat for a long time, and I want to make sure I'm proficient. So I said, oh, okay. And we go flying around, and I'm trying to just hover and, not feeling it. And we probably flew for an hour and a half or something. He came back and he said, well, Stu, that's your check ride. You're an aircraft commander now. And it was like, man, the confidence went from below zero to way up in the sky. I said, really? And that was another miraculous turning point. And
good thing he didn't tell you. He didn't tell you ahead of time. You just went up and did it.
Yeah, we just thought we were messing around, and the left seat and right seat are about as close as we are, but when you're in that thing, it seems like the left seat's way over there, and but that was a miracle. And then from then on, it was, I turned into a hot dog.
And I can see that. Just by knowing you for the last 5 years, I can, get a feel for you a little bit. So how many hours did you fly in Vietnam?
I got just about 1,000, which is, I'm pretty proud of it. It's way up there for somebody that didn't fly for like 3 months you were there, or 3.5 months, altogether. So we were limited to 160 hours a month. Then you had to take a few days off. And so it was 952 hours, something like that.
It's pretty impressive. So another story that I recall from you is after the war, you were back in the States, but you kind of kept an eye on, had some idea where your helicopter was that you flew over in Vietnam. And then you had the ability to find that aircraft and take it for a spin. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I belong to, it's called the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, and they have a register of all the aircraft. And I don't know how many years ago it was, there was a fellow named Justin Seaworth, and he lived in Reno, I believe, and somehow I got a hold of him, and he owned the helicopter. And he said, why don't you come out sometime? And I thought, well, to fly to Reno, rent a car, go there for a few hours, come back. I didn't think it was worth it at the time, so I declined. And then years later, he contacted me and said he sold the aircraft to a company called Haverfield Aviation in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And my brother, Joe and I kid about, was in this Army security for 20 years, and then he was worked for NSA, and he lived in Maryland. So I was trying to contact this place, and so I went to their website, and I was trying to just say, you have the helicopter, I flew it, and all this stuff, and then they contacted us and said, well, come out, excuse me, on such and such a date. And so I flew out to Maryland. Jeff and I drove up there, met these people. They were just super wonderful, and put us up in a little motel downtown. And then the next day we went out, and it's blue and white now, my helicopter, but it's mine, 6717391.
Wow.
And so we went flying for about an hour and a half or something.
And did you fly it?
Oh, yeah.
After all this time, you had not flown it for how many years?
50 years.
And you just popped in there like it was riding a bike?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
So we flew all over, came back, and then they had a big potluck thing in the hangar, and it was just miraculous. And there was a lady there from a small college that taught journalism, and she wrote for the Gettysburg Times or something. And so the next morning, Jeff and I got up, had breakfast at the motel, and then we were going to drive back to his house. And here's this newspaper there with my picture on the front. It said, this is a real blessing, and it shows Jeff and I. And I don't know if I showed you that, but I have the newspaper and stuff. So
very cool.
So I tried not to take them all, but I took a bunch.
So how different was your helicopter? I mean, obviously, it's been turned into a civilian purposes, but it was military. I mean, I'm just intrigued by what it was like to take the controls again. And I mean, did you remember everything? Did you need a refresher, or was it so ingrained into your training that you could just take over? Do you remember the way it sounded? I mean, was there nuances about the machine that you remember that took you back there?
Oh, it's just sitting in the seat. You automatically know the collective cyclic, the pedals, the radios where the gauges are, instruments, and it was just like this fella, his name was Jim, that was their pilot. Mm-hmm. And he was an interesting fella. He put himself through flight training, to become a helicopter pilot. So we took off, and he took off from the hangar naturally. And then I took the controls, and we shot a landing at some place out in like a runway, and flew around and stuff. And the operations manager, his name was Stan, was in the back, and then a maintenance fella. And so it was kind of funny because I heard him say, hey, this guy's still a good stick, and and then I found out that when I was trying to find information out, they said I was actually filling out an application, There you go. So, but it was, that was once in a lifetime. I mean, I don't know anybody that's got to fly their same aircraft. And my crew chief, I sent him some pictures. He still lives in California. His name's Jesse Zendejas, and we keep in contact once in a while. And it's funny, I have a picture of him, like when we were so young. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of amazing.
That is very cool.
I think some of the stories that I've heard from Stu in our time hanging out here at the coffee shop have just puts it into a different perspective of a different time, and answering the call, and putting yourself in harm's way, and just I'm in awe of the person that you are now, and just your accomplishments. I mean, it's just unbelievable, and these are the things that people tend to forget this day and age. And now because of this podcast, forever in the annals of time, Stu. We'll be able to hear your story so long after me and you are gone. So, yeah, it's just great. So, when you were done with the war, you were there for how long?
Year.
Like 1 year. Okay, and you came back to the States. Walk me through that transition.
Rapidly, I got back to the States. Most people become flight instructors. And so when I got back, there was an abundance of returning pilots. So they said, well, Stu, we're going to stick in some maintenance company. So I was a launch officer. I'd show up and walk out on the flight line, and then the instructors with their students, if they found something wrong with the aircraft, I'd say, well, we don't have any spares. So they'd go back, and it was a pretty easy life, and then somehow I got to be a platform instructor, and I can yak quite well, but when somebody says, do a speech, an informative speech tomorrow, I'm just like,
It's like
tell me what
water.
Yeah, tell me something to talk about, and I'll go with it. And so I was doing that, the final one I think had to be 45 minutes or whatever, and everybody's working, doing copies and all this stuff, and I don't have a thing, just nothing. and Joe might know I'm a seat of the pants person, so I walked in front of the class, and there was a ream of paper, so I just grabbed a bunch of blank papers and handed them out like you're supposed to hand your copies of your outline, and I said, just don't say anything, and I got up there and did my thing, and I went back in the back with I think the instructor was a captain, and he just was praising me. Everything was just absolutely perfect. And I said, sir, I have to tell you, I didn't have a clue, And then back in the day, Senator Proxmire from Wisconsin was the head of armed forces or something. And my mom ended up writing him a letter and said, my son's got all these medals and stuff, and he's not even flying. So I thought, what do I do now? So I went to this major, I think it was, and said, my mom wrote the senator. Of course, there was panic. And then I got into instructor school right away. The only kind of regret is I wanted to teach people like a Joe or something that you can really kid around with, and we had the Vietnamese. So some of that was talking to them like the Lone Ranger in Tonto, you would say, oh, what way you take off? I take off this way. Then he'd go that way. But
okay.
So I messed with them a lot. I told Joe, we do.
I don't know if you'd want Joe in your class.
Oh, we'd have a hoot.
We would have fun, regardless of what we were doing. So you get out of the military then, and I have met your lovely wife and your daughter, so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get out of the Vietnam War, and what have you done after all that?
I was a gearhead, and I had a Harley back in Easy Rider days with an extended front end and all that stuff, and so I drove my poor dad nuts because he's aviation. He wanted me to stay in aviation, and here's Stu with his Roadrunner and Harley working at a gas station, and I was floundering around, and I'd known Janet a little bit, and so everybody always came to my mom's or my parents' house, but my mom was the one that she'd talk to anybody. She was super. So one day, Janet and her friend, I think Doris, we're over there, Doris. Anyway, so being the brave person I am, I said, Mom, ask Janet if she'd like to go out and get a drink tomorrow. Because I was chicken. So we did, and then, let's see, I think I was going to go back to Savannah, Georgia, and have a job there. Janet was going to go to nurses training, and we got down there, and that all fell through. We came back. I worked as assistant manager to Ben Franklin for a while, and then I got a job at Stay Rights and met some guys there. I was there like 8 years, got into manufacturing and scheduling and all that stuff, and that's kind of what I did most of my career.
All I have to say is, thank goodness for moms. She wrote to the senator. She
Yeah.
found you your wife. I mean, we owe her a lot, I think.
Yeah, I believe that. And your wife is a sweetheart, and she puts up with you, so she must be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. But so, what are you doing with yourself these days now that you're retired? Besides hanging out with me at Cabin Coffee?
Semi-retired.
Semi-retired.
I have a license to spray herbicides and stuff, so I still do. I did that kind of part-time with my best friend back home for like 12 years, so I still do that to some people I know. I'll say, I'll spray your yard, and I work on vehicles a little bit and stuff, but that's kind of my part-time stuff. We talk about yards. I'm really anal. I fertilized mine yesterday again.
You did?
Yeah.
So I get my my landscaping advice from Stu whenever I tell him, like, hey, I got this going on, and I got brown spots here and this, that, and I can usually get a pretty good rendition as to what's going on with my grass by talking to Stu. He's Johnny on the spot when it comes to my grass needs. So
We might have to work out a barter system here. A little trade for some Kenyan coffee.
Yeah, I do it.
Well, again, so at Cabin Coffee, we do we serve people, not just coffee. And Stu is one of the guys that I've got to know doing this, and just a tremendous person. Thanks for his service, for all he's done. And to think we met over a bag of coffee 5 years ago, and I consider you one of my friends now. And if I don't see you for a week, I start to worry about you and making sure you're okay, and usually send you a text or two to make sure that you're still with us and that there's nothing going on that I'm not aware of.
Since we both have had rotator cuff surgery.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
He tells me I'm young. I just tell him that it may be a newer model, but the miles were harder on this frame than on a lot of people's. But, and it just kind of goes back to the River Prairie. And we have just that Veterans Memorial, and it's such a great place, and they've done so much work with that. And, I think it's just great to have somebody on here who's served our country at such a young age and such a dangerous position in the Army. And Stu, it's always a pleasure talking to you, and I do enjoy our conversations all the time. And you're a lovely wife, and your daughter are just great people. And this is
Thank you.
Kind of what Cabin Coffee's all about.
That's right.
It's what we do, and it's not here's your coffee, there's the door. It's sit down and have a cup of coffee. We're gonna sit down and we're gonna talk a while, get to know each other, and the atmosphere here allows that to happen.
Tell me how your day's going. If you got some problems, what can we do about it?
Absolutely. So,
Thank you, Stu, for being his therapist also. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes her off. It gets her off the hook. So.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you coming in. We did roast you a bag of your Kenyan light roast. Gracie did that because Joe sent her a text saying Stu's coming in. She automatically said she'd have the Kenyan coffee roasted for you. So
Thank
we got
you.
that.
Absolutely.
Great.
And appreciate you. Thanks for being a loyal customer. We're celebrating 5 years, and can't thank you enough, as well as all the listeners and people that support us here in the community.